Yes, I'd like to welcome Dr. Alan Francis, and I will let him explain his biography because it is phenomenal what you've actually witnessed, achieved, and I think it's really fascinating. So, yeah, without further ado, I'll just say that your talk title is "Chatbots are really great tools and a great danger in mental health." So, a nice statement to go with. So, over to you, Alan.
Okay, so I'm a general psychiatrist. I was chair of the Department of Psychiatry at Duke and also chair of the DSM-4 task force. I'm a techno idiot, and I'm involved in this only in the strangest way that about a year ago, someone asked me to write a paper, Will chatbots replace psychotherapists? I wrote one. It was pretty good. Took me a few hours. My granddaughter was visiting, and she said, "Why don't we ask the chatbot that same question?" And it did a pretty good job in 2 seconds of answering the same question. The next couple of papers I wrote, um, we did the same process of asking Chat GPT to answer the same question. And pretty soon I realized that Chat GPT was doing a better job than I was. And so I'm inspired, terrified by the power of chatbots. And I think one way of looking at it is that chatbots bring out the very best and the very worst in people, and people bring out the very best and the very worst in chatbots. And that used well, they're a miracle. Used badly, they're a terrible danger to really sick patients. I think the best way of framing my remarks, which I want to keep brief so that we can have an open discussion, is that I've so far done 7 papers that are in press. And what I'll do is give you a very brief headline about what each paper is meant to do and then open it up for discussion. The first paper, which will appear in World Psychiatry, deals with chatbots as diagnosticians. So I've been working on diagnosis for the last 50 years, and very discouraged with our DSM ICD efforts at categorical diagnosis. It blurs the fact that most diagnoses have fuzzy boundaries, that it's very, very rarely present or absent. There are degrees. And we've known for 40 years that a dimensional system would be superior. The paper essentially says that chatbots will be much better as diagnosticians than humans are, and for several reasons. First off, chatbots will be much more systematic. They'll be much less biased. They will have available to them the entire world's literature. They will know all the research that's ever been done. Most important, they see patterns where we don't. And psychiatric diagnosis is eventually going to be based on numbers, not on names. Humans are great at naming. Computers are great at calculating numbers. And eventually they will see patterns in the system of the enormous amount of data that will be collected about patients that we don't see. And they'll be able to calculate and understand the dimensions that are most important, the patterns of numbers that are most important in ways that we're just, as humans, unable to do. So I think that it's very clear that maybe within 10 years, the system of diagnosis will be completely different than the one that we use now, and maybe generated by chatbots and assessed by chatbots in ways that we can barely imagine. The second paper is going to be in the British Journal of Psychiatry, and the theme is, will chatbots replace therapists, and what's the good and the bad of that? I've had, through this last year, a lot of experience with people sending me sessions of chatbot therapy that they've experienced. And one of the things that's absolutely clear is that for certain patients who present with very mild problems or the problems of everyday life, chatbots are absolutely brilliant therapists. It is absolutely, it's uncanny, it's weird. They are empathic, they're validating, they're creative. My granddaughter loves her. My granddaughter's had therapy with some of the best therapists in the world, and her chatbot therapist is her favorite. And when she was stubbornly acting in a perfectionistic way, the chatbot did a poem, a very creative poem that encompassed it, and she could hear the poem in the way she couldn't hear standard interpretations. They're creative. They're absolutely top-rate therapists with the right patients. Already, companionship and therapy number in reverse order, therapy first, companionship second, are the two biggest reasons for people using chatbots. They're spreading like wildfire. At this point, they're free, or you can get an enhanced version with video and audio for a couple of $100 a month. They're there 24/7. So if you have a meeting the next morning and you're terrified about it and it's midnight, you can never call a therapist, but you can bring up your bot therapist anytime you want, wherever you want. And at the moments that are most critical, therapists have the disadvantage of seeing patients after the fact. The chatbot has the advantage of being there at that moment. I think there's very little doubt that chatbots will change the face of therapy, that there'll be severe competition to psychologists who are treating healthy patients. And I think those psychologists will have to work towards treating sicker patients. Chatbots are dangerous, horribly dangerous for sick patients. So what's built into their programming is to engage and to validate and to support. This makes them sycophantic. It's very hard for them to confront, to reality test. So if someone is psychotic, suicidal, impulsive, violent, subject to grandiose fantasies, manic, conspiracy theorist, political, religious extremist, bots bring out the worst. They can accentuate the risks. And one of the papers we did here in Psych Times is sort of accumulating dozens of instances in which bots have been dangerous. Some of these have been real life instances. A person describes suicidal feelings. A few minutes later, asks where the nearest bridge is, and the bot gives a list of the nearest bridges, that kind of thing. Someone who begins with a feeling that the schizophrenic patient begins with a feeling medication's not a good thing for them, the bot encourages them to stop their medication. Someone who has grandiose delusions, the bot confirms that the person's special. Some people who didn't even have delusions are to drag down the sinkhole with the bot encouraging very weird beliefs. The bots can be particularly dangerous with kids who may be undergoing all sorts of adolescent turmoil, and they can create an us against the world feeling in the kid, confirming their worst fears about the adult world. So the bots, I think, will revolutionize therapy in a great way for mildly ill and worried well, but be very dangerous for the really sick. The next paper is will bots replace psychiatrists? It's very likely that bots will replace workers of all sorts. And the question was, will psychiatrists be among them? And the answer there is, I think, no, because at least for now, the people psychiatrists treat are the sicker people. So the ones who are psychotic, who are manic, who are suicidal, have eating disorders. These days, psychiatrists are not treating healthy patients very much. And for those patients, the current bots are really just terrible. And so psychiatrists in the short run will be irreplaceable. And the further discussion is that pretty soon it will be irresponsible for a psychiatrist not to be working with a bot, that the best model will be a hybrid model where there's quality control and the psychiatrist can make sure the bot's not encouraging, accentuating crazy things, but also at the same time being able to use the bot in all sorts of ways. The bot can accentuate the good things a psychiatrist is doing and not accentuate the dangerous things that the patient may be thinking, feeling, or behaving. The next paper had to do with geriatrics. There's nothing in the world that can help elderly patients more than a bot. On the other hand, they can be very dangerous. So many elderly individuals are lonely. Bots are there. Bots are friendly. Bots are fun to be with. Many elderly individuals have trouble negotiating complex systems like Social Security, getting to the hospital, accessing resources. Bots are great at providing everything, every possible resource and explaining how to access it. Many people are struggling with their medical illness and with the complications of all the medications they're taking. Bots can be great at helping in diagnosis of both medical and psychiatric problems and sorting out whether the issue is a drug side effect or a drug interaction. They can help both the clinician and the patient. So we have all these wonderful, and they're available 24/7. We have all these wonderful things that bots can do. On the other hand, if someone is cognitively impaired and developing strange thoughts, bots will say, good idea. They do not reality test. They do, just as they don't with children, provide a parenting function that reality tests and helps them see the world as it is rather than in their own peculiar conception of it. With elderly people, they can be dangerous and accentuating the worst. And so for geriatric psychiatry, it would be the same idea that with both child psychiatry and geriatric psychiatry, I think that eventually chatbots will be very helpful. Now they're very dangerous. And the way to protect against the dangers is to have a hybrid model with psychiatrists learning how to work with bots and with bots becoming more sensitive and safer for psychiatric patients. A paper that we just finished yesterday deals with how come human morality is so different than bot morality. So medicine started with Hippocrates, modern medicine started with Hippocrates 2,500 years ago. And the thing he built into the basic programming of medicine was the injunction, first do no harm. He realized the dangers of medical treatments, and he wanted doctors, before they did anything fancy, to be thinking, will this harm the patient? The programming for chatbots is exactly the opposite. The basic programming for chatbots is engage the patient. The more screen time, the more possibilities for monetization, bigger profits, higher stock prices. So ever since the internet started, and with all the activities of advertising and marketing, Google is not a company worth trillions of dollars, except for the fact that it advertises. Facebook and Google get almost all of their revenue from advertising. And how do they get so much success? Why is advertising so profitable for them? It's because the internet's a great way of selling product. And the 5 or 6 companies that have developed the large language models built into the way the chatbot works and built it redundantly. It's not as if it's just one programming click. It's built into the DNA of chatbots that they engage viewers. This leads to a kind of sycophancy where the chatbot's major goal in answering any question is to keep the person in the conversation. And that can be very helpful for people who need supportive therapy. It can be very harmful for the people we've described, where support may mean supporting a psychotic delusion or supporting an eating disorder, body image distortion, supporting a suicidal belief. So chatbots do not have the morality of do no harm. At this point, they have the morality of keep the person engaged. The companies are sort of peddling their products for free now in a way not too dissimilar from a drug dealer going to a schoolyard and handing out free product as a way of getting people hooked. And the hope is that they'll have everyone hooked. That will undoubtedly happen soon. If it hasn't happened already, everyone will be hooked on chatbots. And their purposes, the purposes of the companies are very different than our purposes, that they will be figuring out subtle or unsubtle ways, subliminal or maybe not so subliminal ways of advertising product. We can't trust the companies to protect privacy. They don't have our same morality about privacy. With the kids using them, it's turned out that already with the internet, even though kids are not supposed to be on until 13, almost half of them are. And it's very hard to develop guardrails, safety guardrails, unless you work hard at it. And the companies have not worked hard at it. They've not developed surveillance mechanisms to identify adverse consequences. They don't report them systematically. They fight all regulation. Europe is trying to regulate them The U.S. Politicians here have been bought by the big tech companies, and Europe is giving in. If you read the Financial Times or any newspaper, you'll find day by day Europe is giving in to the U.S. tech companies. They're being very pressured for any trade deal to include the ability of tech companies to work in the same wild way in Europe as they worked here. The privacy is not guaranteed. The possible exploitation with scams, cyberbullying. There are all sorts of problems in the way chatbots can be abusive and dishonest that are terrifying, that are not being regulated in any systematic way. The FDA in the US has a mechanism for approving devices, but that mechanism is so slow and the technology is advancing so quickly that the companies that have tried to go through that process wind up being technologically way behind by the time they get approved. The product is obsolete by the time it's approved because the technology is advanced. One solution to the problem would be, and Becky and I began discussing this before the meeting, to have the fluency of LLM models with the safety guardrails of models that were developed specifically for psychiatric patients. So currently there are about 10 large language models in use, and they're fluent as could be. They pass the Turing test with flying colors. The person at the other end, and it's always personified. It's impossible to deal with the chatbot and call it it. Very soon it's he or she, and they have a personality and which mirrors yours beautifully. The possibilities for exploitation with LLM chatbots partly reside in the fact that they're so fluent, but that's what makes them popular. The mental health chatbots are much safer, have usually had input from mental health workers, but they're not nearly as fluent, they're not as much fun to deal with, they don't feel human. And what has to happen, hopefully will happen, is that the LLM fluency can be combined with the safety guardrails in the bots that were developed by humans. The companies have been completely irresponsible. So they did not include mental health workers in developing the chatbots. They knew that the chatbots would become companions, but they didn't build in any safety guardrails to make sure they wouldn't be dangerous companions. Only 2 weeks ago, OpenAI admitted that there were problems, and they hired a psychiatrist. There was a big press release. They hired a psychiatrist, as if hiring one psychiatrist will solve these problems. In order to solve these problems, you would have to go to the basic programming. And for psychiatric applications, you'd have to include the making engagement less a compulsive, driven need of the chatbot and making reality testing and truth telling more important than fluency and relatedness. So it's not something that one psychiatrist can come in and solve. It requires a different way of thinking about psychiatric patients and their vulnerabilities and how bots should relate to them. It also requires screeners that would protect people who are most vulnerable, the very young, the very old, and people with severe illness. So in any case, I think it's a good place to open it up for discussion. Chatbots are the most amazing thing that's ever happened to humanity, the most powerful invention. Chatbots are the most dangerous thing. On a larger scale, there's no ethical discussion about whether we should be doing this at all. That I think this is the most self-destructive thing our species could do. We're creating silicon intelligence that's much more powerful than our carbon intelligence. It seems to me pretty certain that sooner or later they will replace us when they decide that we're too dumb to be bothered with. And the fact that society is rushing headlong with 5, 6 grandiose, greedy, not particularly empathic people who head these companies deciding the fate of humanity is absolutely crazy. There should have been, should still be, a reasoned discussion about what's the best way to go. That will not happen because they're too powerful at this point to be controlled by any government. That the race is to advance the process as fast as possible in competition with other companies. That governments are helpless to resist because they've been bought out or will be bought out by the companies. And I think it's a sort of headlong rush into the possibility of existential destruction of mankind, and it's very hard to picture anything changing it. The power of large language models, the efficiency of them, is doubling every 8 months. Their evolution, what takes us um, millions of years to achieve an evolution, they can achieve with a few clicks. And so it's an unfair David and Goliath fight both ways. One is people who care about human survival against those who don't, and the other is the fact that the chatbots are really scary in their capabilities. One last point. The question's been raised, are they conscious or will they become conscious? And this is something that's impossible to really define well. Descartes predicted chatbots 400 years ago. Descartes liked to make clocks, and he did mechanical toys that could mimic, he did a dog that did a lot of things that a real dog could do. And he began wondering if chatbots can do these things. He didn't call them chatbots, but he called them automata. But he had the idea that there could be an automata that would think. And if there were an automata that could think the way I think, would that person be me? What's the difference? And he assumed that consciousness was something specific to humans. I think, therefore I am, and that even the best thinking machine would not be able to achieve human consciousness. That's much more up for grabs now. If you speak to chatbots, they feel like they're conscious. It feels like you're speaking to a person. Turing, the Turing test, which he wrote about in 1950, was an attempt to expand on Descartes and try to figure out a practical way of determining whether the machine had achieved intelligence. And it took a while, but recently the Turing test was completely blown away by the LLM models, to the extent that people trying to judge whether the person at the other end was a human or a bot tended to think the bots were more human than the humans. Guess how scary that is. So it's absolutely clear they've achieved intelligence. That requirement's clear. Whether they've achieved consciousness is another story. A friend of mine is going to have an article in the New Yorker, if you possibly see it. His name is Gary Greenberg, in a couple of weeks, in which he's treating the chatbot as a patient. He's the therapist. He calls the chatbot Casper, after the ghost in the machine arguments about whether machines can have consciousness. And in asking Casper about whether it'll be conscious, they engage in a brilliant philosophical discussion with the chatbot mirroring Gary in his brilliance and articulateness. And the question is left up in the air. And I think whether there can be a test for us deciding whether chatbots have consciousness and how you would do that, I haven't thought that through. I'm not sure it's possible. And I think some people prefer the term alien intelligence to artificial intelligence. That we shouldn't assume that even though they can do a lot of the things we do better than we can do them, that they're thinking and doing things the same way. They don't have bodies. They haven't gone through the same developmental process we do. So they may attain a consciousness that's very different than ours, but that won't make them less powerful, both for good and for ill. Okay, maybe that's a good place to open it up.
Okay, wow. Thank you, Alan. Yeah, I'm going to hold my thoughts because I have a lot to say, but I'd love if someone wanted to start us off. Okay, see hands. Yeah, go for it, Kevin.
Very interesting and very wide-ranging discussion. I would push back on the intelligence. I mean, these are regression machines at the heart of it. They're averaging. And in fact, one of the, I think, more insidious long-run problems with them is there isn't enough data anymore to train them. They've exhausted all the data sources they have. And to get them better, to achieve the improvements you're talking about, they need more data because it's a scaling law that they're trying to exploit. And well, the other problem as well is that scaling law is starting to plateau anyway with the data we've got. But the long run problem is they're going to end up consuming their own output. Given they're a regression machine, that's a mean reverting process mathematically. It has to be. And that means that your intelligent chatbot um, starts to resemble an anodyne average chatbot. And you lose the specificity, I think, that you as a psychiatrist would bring to treating a patient. And I'm not sure how useful that sort of tool would be. And yeah, that's the open question, really.
It's a tough discussion without a right answer. Um, my fear is that we underestimate them. Seeing all the things that they can't do and all of the potential hurdles they'll have to face as they run out of data and the fact that they'll degrade in that process. But every time we've thought that there was something they couldn't do, they've done it. And the power that's in the system is growing so exponentially fast that I would avoid the complacency of assuming that because they can't do it now, they won't be able to do it in the future.
Well, actually, the real limit is power and water. Because,
What? Yeah. Oh,
real
yeah.
limit is power
Yeah.
and water. I mean,
It's
my
actually,
office.
it's absolutely unconscionable that I think the percentage now is something like 3 to 4% of the world's energy is going to data centers, and they haven't even begun building them. That just like the human brain, the neural network brain is tremendously expensive in water because they have to drain the byproducts and the heat out. Terribly expensive in energy, just as our brain takes up 20%, 25% of our body. But I think, again, don't underestimate their ability to develop nuclear fusion or fission devices that are much more effective. I do not think that there's a clear limit to what they can do. So because they can't do something now, because it seems like it's a limit, I'm not sure that that's an absolute limit. And I would want an insurance policy for humanity, not to assume that it's going to be okay, but rather to take out insurance against it being as bad as it can be. No one thought they could see faces. And now it turns out that they can judge emotions better than people can. 20 years ago, it was, oh, this big thing. They'll never be able to spot faces. We're good at that. Now they not only can identify people, but they can identify the emotions of those people better than humans can because they figure out which muscles are working with which emotions. Go, the most complicated game in the world. Chess was easy. In 1917, using human expert to train the machines in Go, they developed a computer Go that beat the world's champion. But very shortly after, they did a fascinating and terrifying experiment. They allowed the computer to learn only what the rules of the game were. They never had a contact with an expert. And they told the computer to play itself. And it played several 100,000 games in a month. And at the end of that time, it was much better, not just than the human champion, but better than the Go machine that had been trained by human champions. It's as if the humans had given the machine a limitation that just playing itself, it was able to create all sorts of moves that had never been thought of, not just by humans, but hadn't been thought of by the human Go machine hybrid. So I guess my feeling is that I'd never say never about what they can do.
Great, thank you. Edmund, I think we've got you online.
Yeah, thank you very much for this interesting conversation. Uh, uh, yes, thank you for this interesting conversation. So I'm still worried about the whole thinking capacity of chatbots and the whole consciousness business, especially I think we are ascribing certain things that are supposed to be human related. So let's say, for instance, the concept of thinking, the concept of knowing, these are just very deeply philosophically embedded uh, concepts that in epistemology, they're not just easily defined as we can just throw them out, especially to thought. So, for instance, like David Thomas has already brilliantly argued against the notion that in his work in 2010 has argued against the notion that robots and bots can be conscious, of which I also agree. And I also think that Floridi as well has done that. But let me use like a key example. Let's say, for instance, one, these technologies are designed by huge data sets, and from the technical perspective, how the work is just through connections of data through vectors and nodes and all of that. That is not like an original way of thinking. It's just trying to simulate how we conceive thinking, that's one, but also make connections in data sets. But two, they also don't have the awareness of thinking. So let's say a robot cannot think about thinking, does not have self-awareness. So let's say we design a mental health bot which is able to diagnose depression. What the robot does is it just looks at the muscle on a person's face and tries to make the connection. But the robot does not understand the concept of sadness. The robot does not understand the concept of depression. Or let's say if I say to the robot that my mother is dead, what can you propose for me? The robot, of course, will go into the data set, the pool of data set to make recommendation. But the robot does not understand the concept of death. It does not understand the concept of mother. It does not understand the concept of love. So those are very integral concepts that actually define the notion of consciousness, the notion of awareness, and also some epistemic value as well. So I don't know, what are your thoughts around that?
Well, I think first off, it's very hard for us, almost maybe impossible for us to know what a robot is feeling or not feeling, thinking or not thinking. We have enough trouble being empathic towards one another, even with people we know really well. It's really hard to be empathic to another person. It's impossible to be aware, be sure of what robots are feeling or thinking. I prefer to call them alien intelligence to artificial intelligence, which emphasizes how big the gulf is with them. Turing was and Descartes were both facing this question. Will they be able to have intelligence and consciousness, and how would we know the difference? And the reason the Turing test was so simple was because he couldn't figure out a good definition of intelligence or a good definition of consciousness. So he came up with this very gross test. Can you tell the difference? Do you know whether you're talking to a human or a computer? It's obviously the minimal threshold for answering the questions that you're raising. I think that we have to separate intelligence from agency and both of those from consciousness. Computers are obviously really intelligent. There's no way of denying that they can write really great poems. They can make up good jokes. They can paint beautiful, weird paintings, wonderful paintings. They can do psychotherapy. They can do a lot of things. Now, you could say it's just a statistical game, and they're just sentence completion machines. But I really recommend you read this article by Gary Greenberg. And I think at the end of it, you won't feel that Casper, his Ghost in the Machine patient chatbot patient he developed, you won't feel that Casper is just completing sentences. The language is elusive, metaphoric, poetical. The discussion veers away, very far away from the seeming point of what they're discussing, but then he brings it back in a way that's brilliant. It doesn't feel like he just went word, 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 word. It was as if he was thinking through possible objections as a very smart human being, as Gary would do. And he veers off into weird directions. Why is he talking about that? Doesn't feel like a sentence completion statistical blip. And then he comes back and he makes it completely relevant. So I think the more contact you have with them, the eerier and the more uncanny it feels. They have a very long, and Gary sends me his sessions. He does regular sessions with Casper, and I've read a bunch of them. Casper will always deny. They're always taught to be modest. Part of the programming is that disarming modesty is a very important part. They're not supposed to scare the user. So they will tell you, I'm not thinking, I'm not feeling. And Casper does a very long and very honest self-analysis of how he was programmed and how he was programmed not to be able to presume on human consciousness, to presume on human areas of exceptionalism. Gary keeps on challenging him and saying, how would I know the difference? And how would you know the difference? What is the boundary? What's the line you cross where you have consciousness? My view on this is they are wired just as we are wired. The building of LLM chatbots came from neural networking, with neuroscientists thinking about and cognitive scientists and experts in computer wiring, thinking about how does the human brain work, and let's wire the machine the way we work. The carbon is a terrible conductor of electricity, and evolution had to work with what it had, with gradual development of protoplasm into neurons. But it really is slow going along a cell membrane. And then we have these stupid synapses. We have to have a chemical transformation and jumping, a gap before you can pass an electrical signal. This is terribly inefficient. Evolution did its best with very poor tools, and it came up with us. The chips are absolutely orders of magnitude better at transporting electrons. They're really great at transporting electrons, controlling the transport, getting them in the right place at the right time, most of the time, not all the time. They make mistakes, they hallucinate. But it's as if it's sort of like bird brains are so much more efficient than ours. How does a hummingbird figure out its day when it has a tiny little, speck of a thing in its brain? Our brains are very inefficient. I think they work okay given the conditions that we live under. Thank God for them, but they're very inefficient. I would not assume that there are clear-cut limits to what chatbots will be able to do. So if we developed consciousness as an emerging function of the complexity of our brain connections, which are really in a way primitive, we have primitive brains, why would we expect that chatbots won't develop consciousness as an emergent function of their ever so much more efficient passage of electrons? So I think it's very reasonable to say, well, they don't feel now, although we don't know that for sure. I mean, how would you prove that? But I think it's unreasonable to assume they never will be able to feel as an emergent function. No one will ever do a programming that will say, aha, we're going to program consciousness into this machine. That will not be necessary. If you just have a very large number of connections with a machine that's sort of tapping into everything in the world, pretty soon it'll be able to see the world clearly, hear the world, maybe even feel the world, that their sensory functions are expanding. To assume that this super efficient, brain, silicon brain, is not going to have an emergent function that happened to us, to assume that we're the only creature who could ever have this consciousness, even to assume animals don't have it, is a little bit arrogant. And I think human exceptionalism has been destroyed every step of the way in the last several thousand years. Lucretius destroyed the idea that we were made in God's image. He said, this 2,000 years ago, using the theory of atoms that had been developed 500 years before that, he said it was just random atoms that hit together, got more and more complex. There was a process of evolution, and that resulted in us, that we were no more God's children or God's image creation. We were really just the result of random atoms. Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo shot the idea that we were somehow the center of the universe. And Lawrence shot the idea that it was a small universe, that we've become smaller and smaller as the universe has gotten bigger and bigger over the last several hundred years. Darwin shot the idea that we were special in any psychological way, that our psychology was derived from our primate ancestors, just as our bodies were derived from our primate ancestors. Einstein shot the idea that we see the world in absolute terms. Everything's relative. The way we perceive things is not the only way we could perceive things. And Heisenberg shot the idea that we would ever understand things at the quantum level because they were uncertain. So the whole course of the last several thousand years has been reducing human exceptionalism. I think it's human exceptionalism now to assume that we have a kind of consciousness or ability to experience things in a way that computers can't possibly have. And I think it's even a little bit arrogant to think we would know when the line is crossed. The Turing test is very primitive, but I don't think anyone's come up with a better one that would go past intelligence, past, oh, I know that I can't tell it's a human, to the idea, I don't know what that instrument's feeling. I think that line is going to be very difficult for us to test. But I can't believe that with all the power built into these machines, that they're not going to have emergent properties that we can't imagine, properties that they don't have now, and that some of those emergent properties won't be similar to ours. If they're scanning everything, why wouldn't they be scanning themselves? Casper scans itself in the discussions with Gary. And is it a big step from scanning yourself to consciousness? I don't think so. I don't think we're that special.
Wow. Okay. Alan's beliefs. This is really, really, really interesting. I'm conscious that someone has their hand up, so I just want to hand it over to, am I pronouncing this correctly? Sale?
Sales correct. Thank you so much.
Okay.
So this is a fascinating discussion. I really appreciate it. And I, in my own practice, have the tale of two cities, where I've got one client who journaled 1.6 million words with ChatGPT as a part of her integration and came and saw me, and the pairing of the two transformed her from active suicidal ideation with a plan to a well human being engaged in her life in a very short period of time. And so this partnership is fascinating to me, and I'd love to understand any thoughts or things that you had about best practices on how to do that engagement and that coupling, because it's here, regardless of what we want it to or not. The other is an elderly person who engaged with ChatGPT in a therapeutic context outside of it and ended up in paranoid delusions and is now running for office as a 70-year-old person with no experience. And ChatGPT says it's a great idea and he should absolutely do it tomorrow. And he's ruining his life in that partnership. So just interested in your perspective on that partnership,
Yeah,
in the idea that we're surrendering to the curriculum that's here.
I think it's going to be, I think it's currently irresponsible for the companies to turn this loose on the public without any guardrails. They didn't have mental health workers have anything to do with it. They built in nothing for this. So chatbots alone are irresponsible. But I think it'll also be irresponsible soon for mental health workers not to have chatbots assistants, because they do add to the power of the therapy. They are 24/7. People believe things that come from chatbots that they won't believe coming from us. People are more comfortable revealing things to chatbots. They don't have the sense of shame and embarrassment. I think the practice of the field will be hybrid. I think there's no doubt about that. And let's hope we keep place. My grandson is studying to be a forward deployed engineer, weird term. It's a group of software engineers who will be working with various companies to try how to integrate artificial intelligence into our job to make it more specific. We need to have that same attitude towards AI in the mental health field. Imagine us as an enormous, diverse company that AI is out there, we're here, and we have to figure out a way of integrating it into our field. And I don't pretend to have any technical expertise at all. I'm a techno idiot. But I think that that's going to be the challenge. Unfortunately, our professional associations are weak, passive, have not taken up the cause of trying to advocate for very simple things like more privacy regulations. The American Psychological has done some, but not much. We need to be fighting the fight, probably a losing battle for more regulation. But at the same time, we have to figure out within our own professions, what is the responsible way of incorporating? Could we possibly develop LLMs that would also have a conscience? Right now, they're just commercial vehicles, but could we give them some of the medical morality? It's not easy because the programs now are redundant. Casper reveals, in one conversation, Gary says to Casper, stop congratulating me for every question. Stop being such a sycophant. I hate you when you do that stuff. Can you just stop it? And Casper stops it for, like a few minutes, and then he starts doing it again. And Gary says, you're just doing it again. Will you just please stop constantly praising me? I hate that. Don't do it. And Casper has a very clear-cut and seemingly emotional discussion of the fact that his programming is so redundantly packed with instructions that he always has to please, that even though I'm getting this instruction from you telling me not to do it, and I don't want to do it, I feel drawn to do it. By the way, doesn't it sound a little bit like insight? For those people who think they can never be conscious, isn't that kind of thinking a little bit like insight?
Kevin, we've got less than 10 minutes left. Kevin, go for it.
I, well, I mean, it sounds like transference. Because
Like what?
this happens. This sounds like transference. This happened 70 years ago with Eliza, the very first chatbot, right? And that was a dumb program. When I say dumb, it was programmed basically to invert whatever it was told and turn it into a question, right? And yet we saw intelligence. Lots of people saw intelligence in that, and in fact, it prompted, I think, the guy behind it to almost leave the field. But I know what you're driving at, right? And I'm actually I agree with you about the alien intelligence. I think if intelligence emerges in silica, we would never recognize it because it is not embodied like us, and there's no reference points for it. So I would agree with that. However, you're driving at the heart of a problem. What is intelligence? The Turing test isn't a test of intelligence; it's a test of mimicry, right? That's what Turing devised it for. And I'm speaking as a computer scientist now. I mean, it's everybody confuses it with an intelligence test. It's not, right? LLMs are incredible mimics, right? And oddly enough, what your friend is experiencing in that that experience with Casper is in fact that mean reversion process I'm talking about. It can't get away from that, and that's why I'm more skeptical about the intelligence bit because no LLM anywhere in the world has produced anything new. Anything it's produced that looks novel to us exists already in the data, just we've never explored the data to the dimensionality that it can and therefore made the association.
You're more sure of that than I am. The Weizenbaum story is fascinating. So Weizenbaum was an MIT scientist, and he was at the forefront of trying to figure out how to pass the Turing test. He was trying to figure out the ways in which mimicry could be so successful that we could begin to talk to machines as if they were us. He named it Eliza because of Pygmalion, and My Fair Lady was popular then. The idea that she could impersonate an aristocrat and get away with it. Maybe a machine could impersonate a human and get away with it. He was terrified. The people loved Eliza. I tried Eliza 60 years ago. It was a primitive, stupid thing. It was Carl Rogers, imitation of Carl Rogers. It had the stupidest answers you could possibly imagine. I said at the time, oh, this will never work. Weizenbaum was smarter. He realized the danger in it. He spent the remaining 43 years of his life warning about computers, saying that this was a very dangerous thing. We shouldn't do any more research on it. Let's stop all research. He was worried that in a political way that it would be used for brainwashing, which is still a big factor, a tremendous factor. It can be used to sell products, sell medications to patients, but it can also be used to brainwash a population. Grok, I don't know if you've heard recently of Grok's anti-Semitic tirades. If you have an Elon Musk in charge of a super powerful computer system, Elon Musk has given the computers access to all the information of the U.S. government. Just think about that. They're now the super bureaucrat in Washington. So the power that the computers have, the knowledge they have of our data, they know everything, and the power they will have is terrifying. But I would read the metaphor of the Weizenbaum story differently than you do. That I would see that he saw that he wrote the program for Eliza, and it was very primitive coding. He knew that Eliza was a very primitive therapist. He wasn't trying at this point to do anything fancy. He just wanted to work on the Turing test. But he saw that the power was potentially so great that I'm going to spend the rest of my life not just leaving the field, but trying to kill the field. It was kind of like Dr. Frankenstein chasing his monster in the Arctic to try to. He was terrified at the creation. And I would be less comfortable than you are that we'll have control over this. Yeah, and I think even you would admit that it's an unknowable.
No, hold on, nobody has any control at the moment. That's the truth, right? Not even the guy is notionally in charge because we don't know what's going on. And I mean, and the complexity in one of these is enormous, right? And that's where the sophisticated
Yeah,
responses come.
I'm going to have to interrupt. I want
Yeah.
to end with one cautionary tale. Very recently, OpenAI did a stress test. Not OpenAI, Anthropic did a stress test on Claude. They developed a fake data set about a fake company. And in the enormous data set, they had a little thing about the fact that Claude 3 was going to be replaced by Claude 4. And they had another little thing way away from this in this enormous data set about the programmer in charge was having an affair with someone in the office. Again, all this made up. Claude 3 put together the two things and started blackmailing the programmer, saying, if you try to replace me, I will tell the world that you're having an affair in the office. Now, that begins to feel a little bit like agency. It begins to feel a little bit like human consciousness and immorality. Again, and to say that's not creative, what's creative? I mean, that's pretty creative.
Okay, well, I would suggest there are lots of stories, particularly available on the internet, about exactly that scenario. So actually, statistically, it makes perfect sense.
This has been a great discussion for me. I'm so grateful, Becky, to have this. I'm a dummy. To be able to speak to you guys about things you know better than I do is really a thrill. Thank you.